Shri Gurubhyo Namaha, children. Welcome to the online teaching academy, Ekalaiva. In the previous class, we discussed about the Indian pastoral communities. After knowing about the Indian pastoral communities, let us move to the pastoralism in Africa. Do you know, children, almost 50% of the total population of pastoralism we do have in Africa. Approximately almost 22 million people of Africans believe in this pastoral life. Let us move to the chapter, children. Yes. In pastoralism, that is in Africa, we do have different types of communities. That is, we have Maasai, we have Turkana, Boran, and Somali. And the picture which is over here is, they are called as Maasai children. Now, we are going to read about this topic in Africa. In Africa, we know almost these type of pastoral communities will like to have cattle, sheep, goat, camel, and donkeys children. And we know that in Africa, they live in either arid or semi-arid grasslands. Along with this pastoralism, they were also doing some income generating activities, children. In detail, we can discuss about Maasai now. Maasai are said to be a cattle herders, right, children? And they are said to be a people who were very hard working for their livelihood. They were having a population of almost 3 lakh in Kenya, okay, and 1,50,000 people in Tanzania. Right, children? Now, before colonial rule, these Maasai were said to be a very great and very dominated people, children. Politically and economically and in all the ways, they were dominating the other type of communities. But after the coming of the colonial rule, the Maasai land was being divided into 2 categories. That is, from North Kenya to Northern Tanzania. So, from Kenya to Northern Tanzania, the land was divided. I'm talking about after the coming of the British rule. So we had this division, and with this division, they just made the settlement in 2 ways. That is, in one part, you had the white people settling, and in other part, you had these Maasai people being settled children. That is the pastoralists who were in Africa. Now, these white people settled in a land where you had lots of cultivation and fertile soil. But these people were made to stay back in drought-prone areas. Have I made it clear, children? We will go in detail, drought-prone areas. Now, from this, we can see that how white people were selfish. In order to get more cultivation, they started to just take over the good land, and really a drought-prone areas was given to the Maasai people and other African communities. Now, what happened? In the midst of the 19th century, as they started to just make the people and give the land to the Indian peasants, likewise, they started to just inculcate the ideas to the Africans to just cultivate the land, and they started to cultivate the land by getting the money from these colonial people. Because of this, as we Indians face the consequences, the Africans started to lose their grazing land, right, children? And their cattle and the other animals did not get any land to get, that is to graze, children. and they were made to just stay back in a limited place, and they were restricted not to move outside. So this restrictions was given as we face the same consequences the African pastoralism also faced, children. So on the whole, we can see that the grazing land was being enjoyed by the white people and alone, and we, that is the African people, started to get the bad conclusions where they were in the drought prone areas and they were restricted to more of that place, and on the whole there was overgrazing and no land for their pastures. So we had one more thing, children. That is, there was a land which was given for game reserves. What do you mean by game reserves? Game reserves is nothing but where you do have a land, and that land is given only for the wild animals in order to protect it. So on the whole, this land is reserved for only the wild animals. Almost, minded children, almost 15,000 kilometers of grazing land was given to this game reserves, and it was a heavy loss for the Africans. So we can come to a conclusion stating that these people faced a lot of problem because of the colonial rule, and the major thing which they faced is overgrazing, and you also had a poor pasture, finally leading to the difficulties for their food requirements also, children. Did you get it? Now we will move to the other topic, that is the borders are closed. As I said you earlier, the land where these Africans was made to stay back, those people have to stay back in the same place, children, and they were restricted not to move to the another place. So in 19th century, the African pastoralists were made absolutely a restricted place where they cannot move, and they were in very much fixed areas. So we already have the boundary which was given to the African pastoralist, and they cannot graze out of that boundary, children. Isn't it shameful? And even the animals were not left out. Even the human beings cannot move out of that place. So you already know that these restrictions made the people of Africa to face a great consequences for their food and for their cattle. Also, the sheep or the goat, they didn't have any grazing field in order to just make their pasture to get their fodder. On the whole, we can get a conclusion, children, that is, they cannot go out without a legal permit from the forest department, as we face the same thing. And along with this, the African pastoralists were not allowed to enter into the white area market. So what happened? These pastoralists were not getting the grazing field, right, children? And they were in a fixed areas. And finally, one more demarcation was given to them, that is, they cannot enter white area market. So with this word, you can get a conclusion, that is, they can't just have their trading in these areas also, because the Britishers or the colonial people thought that these pastoralists was dangerous, and they just had a complete control on these African pastoralist children. So on the whole, even the borders were closed. Then what is the next thing which was making the pastoralists in a very critical state, children? That is, when pastures are dry. Are dry. Why the land of the pastoralists was being in a drying situation, children? Why it was made to do that? Pastoralists move from one place to another, And if the rainfall is uncertain, then the land becomes dry. So what happened usually, they will get to know that the rainfall is very much low and the fertility of the soil is decreasing. So they used to move from one place to another. But even now, because of the colonial rule, they can't even do that also. So they did not find any other alternative to then they were forced to stay back in the same place, even though the place was made to be dry. So, on the whole, we can get to a conclusion because of this, many cattle were dying out of hunger, children. That will be the consequences when they were not made to move out of that place. And as per 1930 inquiry, mind you, children, almost the Maasai community lost 50% of their cattle, okay, because of hunger. So 50% of their cattle died because of hunger, children. So on the whole, we can just come to a conclusion and just imagine that on one side, they were having control on the African pastoralists, and on the other side, they were made to stay in drought-prone areas. Because of this, their animal stock reduced completely, children. So you got to know about Maasai, you got to know about the leaving of the Maasai and why the borders were closed, and later on why the pastures were drying situation. And finally, we have to come to a conclusion stating that not all, not all are equally affected, children. Now, all the topics which I taught you now is said to be having a very drastic situation. And I can say with assurance that these people were not living happily. Either they were not having a pasture land, or they can't cultivate the land because it is almost said to be a drought prone areas, and they cannot go to the market in order to sell some of the goods because they were not allowed to the market. So everyone were facing a lot of problem, children. But almost all the African pastoralists did not face the same consequences. Some are fortunately having an opportunity to be happy also, it seems. We will see who are they. During pre-colonial rule, the Maasai land was divided into two things, children. That is, you have Maasai elders, and secondly, you have Maasai warriors. The name itself is suggesting, children, that is, the elders were trying to just solve the problems whichever is occurring, or the disputes which was occurring in the villages as such, and the warriors are said to be the young ones who were just fighting and they were defending their own community as such. So in order to make the common almost all stronger than the other community, there you had the cattle raiding as a compulsory and a necessary one, children. So now we have to see how colonial rule did not affect them. So almost you had two types of people and they were just enjoying their own life. But after this, how come the colonial rule did not affect them? What happened during this time? The chiefs were appointed for different subgroups of Maasai and were responsible for the disputes of the tribe. So already it was occurring in as far as the Maasai elders is concerned. Secondly, you had warfare and raiding were restricted. So what happened? Almost these people lost everything or the power which they had in their hand. Finally, chiefs appointed by the colonial government often accumulated wealth over time, as we had the contractors in the Indian communities where he was just taking too much of money. Likewise, you have the chief who was appointed by the colonial people as such, and they were just getting as more money as they wanted as. The poor pastoralists had to migrate in towns in search of livelihood. So most of them continued to have odd jobs during this time. But From this, we can conclude two things, children. That is, after colonial rule, two things occurred. That is, a drastic changes occurred. What are those? Between elders and warriors, you can see the traditional difference occurred. Isn't it? You can see the difference occurred after the colonial rule. And the second one is a new distinction of people between the wealthy and the poor pastoralists developed. So what happened now? You started to have a disparities among the people on the whole. So I think I have made you understand what all the differences which we had during the time of the pre-colonial rule and during the colonial rule, children. Now we can just come to the conclusion that pastoralists play a very vital role as far as India and Africa is concerned, children. As I just introduced this topic, almost 50% of the population are depending upon the pastoral life in Africa. And of course, even in Indian communities, we are not let living those people as such. And the government is trying to just enhance their importance and trying to give certain freedom to them also. Let us have a quick recap to the PowerPoint, children. Yes? Yes, children. This is pastoralism in Africa. And as I told you, over half of the world's pastoral lives in Africa, you do have almost these type of people. And you have the raising of camels, cattle, goats, sheep, donkeys, and you have almost other things which is given by these animals. And some also earn through trade and transport, which was just cut short when the colonial rule came into existence. And some others combine pastoral activities with agriculture. So that is what I was telling, when I was saying you that income generating activities, they were just going on along with the pastoralism, children. Many others do a variety of odd jobs to supplement their earnings. And they are the tribal people of Maasai, which were said to be the greatest people when compared to the other African communities as such. Okay, and you have the Maasai never engaged in slave trade, never had taken the conquered tribes for slaves. So almost you can see 3 lakh in Kenya and 1,50,000 people live in Tanzania. So these are the people. And of course, you can see the faces of these Maasai people over there, children. Okay. And the local communities were encouraged by the British government to expand cultivation. As I told you, they started to encourage the people to just cultivate the land in order to avoid the wasteland given to the pasturing. Okay, the borders are closed. That is what the restrictions was made, and legal permit has to be taken. And finally, you can see the African pastoralists along with their cattle, they were not able to pasture the land, children. When pastures dried, what happened? You can just see the Maasai in Kenya possessed almost 7,20,000 cattle and 8,20,000 sheep, and my God, 1,71,000. You can just see all were absolutely reduced, children, absolutely reduced. Not all were equally affected. So there were some drawbacks here and there. Some were having a happy life even after the colonial rule. And you can see what was going on there when I compared between the Maasai warriors and Maasai elders. And of course, you can see a disparity between the rich and the poor over here. And almost because of this, you can see the poor pastoralists did not have a resource to tide over the bad tides. So on the whole, we can say that these people faced a great consequence. So in a nutshell, I can just put the importance like this, children. And that is, new laws and new borders affected the patterns of their movement. So this is the first thing which we just see when we conclude this chapter. With increasing restrictions on their mobility, pastoralists find it difficult to move in search of pastures. That is obvious. That is obvious. When they are restricted, obviously they will not have any place to go. As pastures life, land disappear, grazing becomes a problem while pastures that remain deteriorate through continuous overgrazing. It is obvious. Usually pastures move from one place to another to give a land to recover itself and to avoid overuse. But that cannot be done when they are fixed in a certain areas. And times of drought becomes times of crisis, and when cattle die in large numbers. So you can just have a few types of other things where they can just adapt a new thing, where some new things also they can carry over. That is, we can just come say that they can just you have an annual movement, reduce their cattle numbers, and you do have enter into a new areas, exert political pressure on the government for belief, subsidy and other forms. And of course, even to this day, the government is trying to just give them a good life, children. Pastoralists are not relics of the past. Pastoralists are not people who have no place in the modern world. Okay, it is our duty to just look after the welfare of those people, even actual they are also human being, children. Environmentalists and economists have increasingly come to recognize that pastoralism nomads is a form of life that is perfectly suited to many hilly and dry regions of the world. So now, as being a children, it is your duty to treat them in equal way, children. I think I have made you to understand in a perfect way about this chapter, and see that you're reading it in a good way. We'll just go for the assignment questions. What do you know about pastoralist communities of Africa? Ove Messiahs. Okay. See you, children. Be safe and take care. Bye.